All right, and we are live. This is JE Live. I'm here. I'm back, and it's been a minute, so I decided to, just because you guys, obviously deserve more consistency on the live streams, decided to make it up to you by bringing in my buddy, who a lot of you guys already know, Sosa Kremenjas. How the hell are you, my guy?
I'm good. It's good to be back on this side of things. Obviously, don't get to do this very often anymore, so it's great to be here. It's great to get to chop it up, get to share some thoughts on this draft class, obviously, with the Rams and the season coming up. And I don't get to do this often anymore, like I said, so every time I do, it's always special. It's always nice.
Absolutely. Well, hey, obviously you're always welcome on. It's always a pleasure. And I think the last time you came on here, I was in the studio, if I'm not mistaken. So it definitely is a little different now. But man, let's talk about it. We got some rookies, right? This team, I don't know what your opinion. Let's start there. What's your opinion on this Rams draft? Because I actually gave it an A+. I thought they freaking nailed it.
Yeah. You know what? I really liked it in general too. I'm not gonna lie. Obviously, when you don't have a first round pick, it's gonna be hard to come away with one of those draft classes that all the pundits are gonna give A+ and that kind of stuff. So, not too concerned with that. I thought it was very interesting that they try to move back up in the first round. We haven't seen them be that aggressive in years, which it feels like maybe they missed a chance, maybe they didn't. I don't know. I think it kind of worked out really well in hindsight, personally. Obviously, the whole season went down the drain based off of what happened with the offensive line last year. And so for me, getting a plug and play day one starter at that spot, you can't go wrong. And a guy who's obviously so versatile. And I think that's another part of this equation here that we got to talk about. And I'm sure we'll dive into it in a few minutes or whatever. But not only is he really good at one position, but he's going to be able to move around, right? We're talking about Steve Avila, of course. So the Rams, you go back to last year, they were shuffling linemen. Not only were guys getting hurt, you got guys sliding to different positions every other week, starting different positions. So I think a lot of that probably stuck in their mind going throughout the process here in this draft class, and that's probably why they maybe graded him higher than another guy like Osiris Torrance, who maybe some other teams had higher. I'm not sure. But that's definitely one thing that stood out to me. I think in general, though, they did a really good job addressing a lot of positions that we all thought were weaknesses. You hit the offensive line twice, which is great. You add 2 edge rushers, and you can never go wrong with taking a swing at the bat. For an edge rusher. At some point you're hopefully going to hit. Knock on wood. I don't know if either of these guys are going to be the guys, but it gives them a chance, obviously, and some other high value picks too. You talk about a quarterback and another receiver. So thought they did a good job. They addressed a lot of high value positions. I don't think they really wasted any picks that I felt terrible about in general. And it's probably been a little while since we could probably say that. So didn't feel like they egregiously reached with any pick or anything like that. So in general, I actually really like the class too.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's one of those things, right? We all get picky. We all have our guys. I know you've been doing this for a while, and you've been following the draft for a while, so you're in the same boat as me. But I think this year, maybe it's just me being more open. I thought they nailed it. I found I liked most of their picks. They got a few of my guys. Getting Warren McClendon, he was one of my guys. Davis Allen was one of my guys, and then they get Desjuan Johnson to end the draft. But it's cool when you already put out content, and a few of my shows I had mentioned guys like Byron Young, and just to see them go after guys that I've constantly pound the stump for on other shows. I mean, that's great. It's gonna add a little bit, I guess, bias to the selection. It's gonna make you feel a little bit good. But I think the problem we have as this has grown into a giant ass event, because that's what it has been. I mean, it was small, and Mel Kiper and guys like him have really pushed this thing to becoming a Christmas style. Like, oh my God, this thing's huge. But we have to kind of temper our expectations, because I think mock drafts have really led us to believe that guys are flying up the board and flying down the board, and that's just not the case. So I think I fell into that trap, especially with Kobe Turner. I wanted to get your thoughts on him, because this is somebody initially, keep in mind, raw reaction, doing 15, 16 straight hours of live stream. I'm like, I didn't really love the pick, but I said immediately, I don't love the pick because Adebawore is there out of Northwestern. And I felt like he could have been there later on, which we don't know. Maybe the NFL valued him more than mock drafts. But furthermore, I said, I think he's going to be like John Johnson, where when they picked John Johnson, I wanted Desmond King. but John Johnson ended up being pretty darn good. So where are you on Kobe Turner?
Yeah, that's interesting. I too liked the kid out of Northwestern. I'm not even gonna try to say his name. Obviously an athletic freak, and it would appear obviously that teams did not value him as much as media thought, because some people did have him in the first round of their mock draft. So obviously not very aligned there in terms of the value. In terms of Kobe Turner, I got some fun numbers on him. I mean, I dug him up from PFF. I was very curious to see when they drafted him what we were looking at. I had never watched him, never even heard of him, to be honest with you. And if I'm not mistaken, he wasn't even invited to the combine. So obviously a guy that was sort of under the radar when it came to it. But among all the guys that were draft eligible, the interior defensive lineman, third highest PFF grade. Again, take that with a grain of salt for sure. It is a grade that is, quite subjective, but of course you would rather take a higher grade than not than a low one. So that's one thing. Very high run defense grade, actually first amongst all defensive linemen, defensive tackles, I should say. 88.8 pass rush grade, that was fifth. Only had 3 sacks, which I think is obviously one area that you're going to want to see him improve. And I don't know that he's going to necessarily offer a huge jolt in terms of the pass rush there, but 34 pressures, that ranks 6th. So has the ability to get after the quarterback to some degree. From what I've seen, he seems to be a little bit undersized, but the motor was just something that was undeniable when you watched. I mean, this is a guy that his hustle it really stood out on tape. So you're looking at a team that didn't bring back Greg Gaines, didn't bring back Ashawn Robinson. They did bring back Marquise Copeland. There's obviously going to be a lot of snaps to be had at just amongst those defensive line positions in general. If they're going to stick to the 3-4 on early downs, you're talking about 2 guys next to Aaron Donald that are going to have to play. So I think there's a really, really good chance that we see a lot of this guy, especially early in the season, because outside of Donald and maybe Copeland to a little extent, we don't really have any proven players. Obviously, Bobby Brown is one guy who's going to be expected to step up, but I'm really excited to see what Turner brings to the table. I think putting him in a room with a guy like Aaron Donald is very exciting, because you got a guy who's clearly a pretty high character guy, and effort is not an issue whatsoever. So if you can just get him crafted a little bit and more nuanced with kind of his pass rush plan and things like that, I mean, you could be looking at a guy that could definitely be a productive player.
And now and I agree with pretty much everything you said. And I feel like Kobe Turner's, every year there's a pick that I like more after the draft, right? Maybe going into it, Kobe Turner I actually had rated lower than Desjuan Johnson, right? I was really, really high on Desjuan Johnson, but coming out of the draft, and when you get a chance to really dive into the numbers and maybe go back to the film, because I only have time to watch about 3 games of each player. I don't have time to sit there and watch 7 or 8. And this guy wasn't really a starter either. I think that's the thing that people also kind of forget here. But then again, so was Lucas Van Ness, right? He never started a game and went in the first round. So I guess that doesn't really matter. But, with Kobe Turner, okay, Jordan Rodriguez, the Athletic, had Kobe Turner in her starting lineup in her depth chart. How do you see that? Do you think he starts day one? Do you think, if so, I mean, they might have 3 back-to-back picks of day one starters, and at that point, you really nailed the draft at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting. I would hope that he's not starting day one personally. I think not to knock the guy or anything like that. I just would hope that somebody who's been there now for a year or multiple years is just a little bit more prone to be expected to step up and actually take that next step in their development. I'm looking at guys like Marquise Copeland, who I think is a really, really stout defensive tackle, really, really good at stopping the run. I mean, he does a really good job at resetting the line of scrimmage. I think he's one of the more strong players pound for pound in terms of the players in the NFL. He's definitely a guy that I think is worthy of taking that next step and playing a little bit more. So I would hope that maybe he can grab a starting spot. And then, the other one is a little bit more, I would say, outside of Turner's sort of realm. Obviously, they're going to need a nose tackle, and I don't think Turner, you're going to want him at that spot. The one guy on the roster who probably everyone's going to look at and have circled in that spot is obviously going to be Bobby Brown. They drafted him specifically for that reason. So if Turner can win out the job versus Copeland, which I think is very, very possible, I definitely don't think that, it's a decided thing going into training camp at all. Certainly could be the starter. I'm going to go with Copeland for now, but wouldn't be shocked either way, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, I could see rotation, except for everybody, besides Aaron Donald, really. I mean, I think Aaron Donald's the one guy you lock him in, whether it's edge or interior defensive line, he's starting. But this could be a giant rotation. This could be like, hey, you earn it, week to week, you're going to have to earn it. And they're in a really weird position because we haven't seen the Rams ever like this. I mean, if you really think about it, even as bad as the Rams were, like even at their worst, they had guys like Chris Long, they had Robert Quinn. Right now they don't really have anybody that's proven aside from Donald. So everybody else is kind of up in the air. And so that brings me to my next point here with Byron Young. You get this guy, he's 25 years old. I noticed they went after more high floor guys, right? Older guys, high floor guys, leaders, captains, all of that. But the interesting thing with Byron Young is, even though some would say he's a high floor, and I would say he is to a degree, the nuances of his game, like that other guys have, like for instance, like Ojulari, for instance, younger player would say he's a more complete pass rusher, would say Byron Young, I would trust more as a complete player, but I would say a guy like Ojulari is a more complete pass rusher, has more of a pass rush plan, has a toolbox. Where are you on Byron Young? Like, can he start day one? Do you see him as that? Or do you see him again, kind of to the rotation point that I was making? Do you see him more as a rotational guy early on?
Yeah. I mean, I think he basically has to start day one, right? Not a lot of options at edge, in my opinion, when it comes to this roster. Somebody's going to be starting that is just not experienced to any extent. I mean, Michael Hoyt may have one job locked up. They might make a trade or a late kind of veteran addition here without affecting the compensatory pick formula. That might be what they're waiting for, which I kind of hope it is when it comes to the edge spot. But I think Byron Young probably has to start. So definitely checks that box in that regard. I think in terms of him as a player, I'm very excited to see what he can become, just because you're talking about a guy with a lot of explosion. Like you mentioned, he's a little bit older. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was 25 coming out. So makes you wonder how much more there really is in the tank. But at the same time, obviously didn't start playing football super early and all that kind of stuff too. So then again, maybe there is a little bit more on-tap potential there. So the one thing I love in my edge rushers is guys who are explosive. And you look at some of the numbers. I mean, the broad jump, the vertical jump, both in the 91st and 98th percentile. So you're talking about a very, very freaky type of athlete, a guy with a great get off from the line of scrimmage. That's the kind of stuff that I need in my edge rushers. The one thing that I wish maybe he was a little bit more sharp coming around the corner. I think that's one thing that I would like to see more of, just kind of limiting some of those steps on his pass rush plan and his arc when he's working towards the quarterback. But he's a guy with a lot of potential. I seen a very interesting comp that I liked. I seen someone say that if he can sort of pan out and become the player that he should be, the Rams have basically found another Samson Ebukam. So I thought that was a really good comp that stuck in my mind for sure.
Yeah, I see. I want him to have more bend. I think when you're talking about what I like in pass rushers, I definitely would say bend. Like Robert Quinn, I don't even know how that dude bends like that. They called him Gumby. And it's like, I mean, because just the way he could bend. But I agree with you in what you're saying there. Get rid of those false steps, maybe. And I obviously you go in the NFL and you work on that and you can figure that out. But yeah, you can't knock his explosiveness is off the charts. He ran a 4.4. I think the guy is a better run defender than given credit for. He at least is a willing run defender, whereas I watch BJ Ojulari or guys like that, where I was like not as impressed with their motor when it came to talking about run defense. So I agree with you. I think he starts, and I think Hoyt probably has that locked up. Then you have guys like Daniel Hardy. You have guys like Keir Thomas, and I think those guys will be in a rotation. Talking about I guess we're kind of going backwards here. But talking about Avila, going back to him, do you see him as a center or a guard? Because I feel like this fan base, you could literally cut it like, with a knife right in half. It's center. One half is center, one half is guard. Personally, I think he should be a guard this year. I think he's probably the center of the future. But I mean, context is needed. He is a natural center. He did start at that position. And I believe either it was a new coach. I forget what it was. I think it was a new coach and a guy transfers in. And so they ask him to play guard. He does it without any, question. Where are you on him though?
I tend to agree. I think he'll start at guard this year, and I prefer him at guard this year. And then I'm not I wouldn't be shocked one bit if he makes a switch to center next year. Definitely think that's going to be the way that it shakes out. For me personally, I think ideally would love to plug him in at one spot and leave him there and just kind of let him learn one spot. But, at the same time, a lot of what he brings to the table is the ability to be versatile. So, not having to pigeonhole him into one spot, I think is probably going to be good for his development. And obviously that's part of the reason why the Rams drafted him is, having the ability to play center at a high level, having the ability to kick out and play guard at a high level, and doing both simultaneously well. So I tend to think that he will play guard this year as well. Left guard, I'm going to assume that's probably going to be a spot. And then next year, probably at center. And, we'll see kind of how that shakes out. I just think the Rams have a little bit more options at center right now than they do at guard. Obviously, Coleman Shelton can play there. I wouldn't be shocked if he's the ultimately the starter. Brian Allen, of course, still on the roster. And then, you kind of look at right guard too. There's a bit of a question mark there, but Logan Bruss, I'm almost considering him a rookie and another draft pick as well, right? Like, this is an offensive line that should, theoretically speaking, get a lot better, even if they're, slightly below league average or league average. That's, like comparing a 92 Ford Taurus to like a Ferrari from last year. So it would be, there's no value that I could put in terms of how much better I think this offensive line can be. And obviously that has to start with Avila.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Ross. I was gonna, throw him in there. Do you see him starting, or do you think it's because I could see them looking at last year. Okay, last year's a redshirt season. This year, we're just gonna develop you and whatnot. And then maybe next year he's a starter. I think they look at him as the future, but is the future now? And I think that's the question everyone wants to know.
That's a good question. I'm not 100% certain. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't start, because I could see an interior trio that would go Avila, Brian Allen, and then maybe Coleman Shelton. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Allen's on the bench and Shelton's at center and Bruss is at right guard. I think there's a lot of different opportunities, and I think that's a good thing for the Rams, right? You're going to go into training camp, and it's going to be like legitimate positional battles. So whoever's the best player, whoever performs the best, go start. And I think these are the type of players too. You're going to want to get them some reps in preseason games. I know the Rams don't start anyone really in preseason, and they shouldn't, but there's certain guys that are on the fringe of maybe winning jobs that should play those games, and they will play those games. And I think that's really going to help us decide who's going to be worthy of starting these games. I hope it's Bruss, because the Rams obviously invested a lot in him. We're talking about a third-round pick and a guy that, you don't draft someone that high unless you do believe that they're going to be a starter, especially at that position. You're talking about, one of the better players at that position. So, I think there's a lot of combinations, man. I wouldn't be shocked at anything. I wouldn't even be shocked if Avila ends up at center somehow and Joe Noteboom's at left guard and then Alaric Jackson's at left tackle. Like, I genuinely think there's a lot of options for the Rams. So that wouldn't be my favorite lineup, but again, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Like, you go from and again, I don't want to say, you have a ton of, you don't have riches, right? Like, this is not a rich offensive line, but there's a little bit more proven depth, or at least potentially proven depth, where you're like, okay, Avila's a day one starter. Now whenever Bruss develops, that's exciting. You have Brian Allen, who was a Pro Bowler, if you want to give him that. Coleman Shelton, who I kind of get the vibe you think Coleman Shelton's better than him, and I'm with you on that. I think Shelton is the better player, which is funny. But then, you have Noteboom, and it's weird because the guys that they let go and then they keep Noteboom, who's coming off a torn Achilles, who might need to kick inside at guard to even make this whole thing work. Just before we move away from the offense line, where are you on Joe Noteboom? Is this somebody that can reclaim that tackle spot, or do you look at him more like he's going to have to kick in at guard?
Yeah, so I would personally keep him at tackle. I know a lot of people disagree. A lot of people think he should be the left guard. I have to personally disagree. I just don't think he could survive at guard. I don't like the way that he plays in that confined little bit of space. I think he's just way better at tackle, which is very unusual because guys are it's usually vice versa, right? The opposite way. It's usually if you can't play tackle, you play guard. But I genuinely think he's a lot better at tackle. And I also will mention this. Last year, the offensive line, like we mentioned, not that good, obviously. And that's me being nice. They were horrible. So the one thing that I think will help a lot this year for Joe Noteboom specifically is if you can get some of these positions solidified, right? You're going to talk about right tackle is solidified at Hamenstein. He's the constant, like someone, or Holden just said in the chat. Shout out to him. You're going to
Yeah.
have, a guard like a Vila or something locked in. I think when you get some of these positions locked in and you have certain players that are clear cut above average or very good players, you can afford to slide your pass protection in certain ways that maybe you couldn't do last year, right? So I think that's one thing that can help a guy like Joe Noteboom, because now he doesn't have to maybe be pass protecting on an island as many snaps in a game, which is just going to be very hard for any left tackle in the league. Never mind when you're going against superstar pass rusher, snap after snap or game after game. You look at teams like the Eagles, the Cowboys, they got so many good D linemen. You're playing 2 stars, 30 snaps each a game, and they're 100% ready to go, right? So that's a big ask for an offensive lineman. And I think genuinely just being a lot better on this offensive line, having some of these positions actually sorted, you could start to slide some help his way, and that should help him a lot too.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think maybe instead of fans looking at Joe Noteboom as kind of like in the way, maybe we should look at him more as like, okay, this is another guy. This is an option. They're going to give all these guys a chance. There's a new offensive line coach in Ryan Wendell. So, I mean, this guy, he could have a different take. He could be like, okay, I think I know you guys went with this and you want to go with this, but personally I see this. And it's going to be interesting to have a different mind in that room, because they didn't just hire him to be a yes man. They don't hire any of these guys to be a yes man, and at least not Sean McVay. So moving on, there's a lot of talk about the quarterback position. Is Matthew Stafford going to make it through the season? Personally, I'm not a mind reader. I didn't go in the future and come back, and I'm not ready to tell you that. But what I can tell you is that I'm not going to say people are sleeping on Stetson Bennett like he's this hidden gem, because the dude just won 2, national titles. Okay. He was in your living room quite often, if you watch college football. But I feel like he's got something to him where he's not just a career backup. I think he could start someday. And I'm curious what you think, because trust me, I've heard it all, and I understand some people. This is one of the most like polarizing picks the Rams have made, because people love this guy and people hate this guy. But what I will say is somewhere in the middle of that love and hate. Like when I watched him, I immediately thought, like when I was going into it, I'm like, I'm gonna hate this kid. I'm not gonna hate him personally. I'm gonna hate the player, right? The prospect. I am going to watch him, and he's going to be like watching Tim Tebow. College quarterback, I don't think can translate. He's going to be like Christian Hackenberg. And Sos, I gotta say, I was pleasantly surprised. I actually really like him. I think he had some really good tape. He's got some, he's rough around the edges at times, but man, he can make the far hash throw look easier than some of the guys that are currently in the league having to make that throw. I know he had a lot of talent, but I think the deep ball definitely is there. I don't think he's got a noodle arm like I've heard. And the guy has moxie. I don't worry about him just completely burning down like a bridge. I feel like this guy in a pinch could come in, take over for Stafford if need be. And I think he could win you a football game or two this year. What do you think about him?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about, right? You're talking about a guy that I think at best should be a spot starter, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
God forbid Matthew Stafford goes down with an injury, and maybe at this point we should expect that, to be quite honest with you. He's not getting healthier as age comes by, and he's never particularly been all that healthy. Tough as nails, though. He's always played throughout things, so you can give him at least that credit. With Bennett, I'm intrigued too. I personally like the pick. Why not? I mean, you needed a quarterback. There's no doubt about it. Last year, I think we all got a good glimpse of just how important a backup quarterback is. And you have certain teams like the Eagles who draft backups in the second round, right? They value backups a lot. Some teams don't value it as much. Like you mentioned, Bennett obviously has the championship pedigree. He's done a lot of things throughout his college football career, pretty much a legendary career, you could say. And every time someone tried to write him off and someone tried to say, someone's coming for his job, he might not have. Every time he found a way to weed those guys off, and not just that, but I mean, you got to give him credit for stepping up in the biggest moments, right? Like it kind of gives me that Stafford championship type of vibe where throughout the playoffs, you're looking at him every single snap on those big key downs, 3rd and 7 against San Francisco to cup over the middle of the field, or all these little nuances. He did the same thing except at the college level, of course. So you want your best players to step up in the biggest moments, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this guy's a starter in the NFL or that he should have been a 1st or 2nd round pick or something. I definitely don't think so. Definitely don't want him to ever start a game personally. I don't think you draft guys in the 4th round when it comes to the quarterback position to ever view them as starters. But I will say I view him as a Gardner Minshew style player where, you can spot start him and he's probably going to win you some games. You more so don't want him to lose you games than you want him to win you games. And I definitely think he could do that. I'm very intrigued to see how he's going to pick up the offense. And he's going to get a ton of snaps throughout the preseason. And ultimately, he's going to be the backup this season. So this is the guy that they handpicked. And as far as I'm concerned, outside of Stafford, they haven't really had a guy that they've drafted and groomed throughout the Sean McVay regime. So I'm very excited to see this was their guy. And per all accounts from all the reputable sources, they loved him. They absolutely loved him. They were scared someone else was going to take him. They tried to hide it as much as they could. And in hindsight, we probably should have known that reading some of Jordan's articles because he fit the bill that she was describing pretty well. And I'm excited to see it, man.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember breaking the news that they were picking him, and I read like Stetson Bennett, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about it. So I'm processing this while I'm on the air, and I'm like, I think they're picking Stetson Bennett. And I mean, okay, I could confirm they're picking Stetson Bennett, and I didn't know how to feel, but I had a 4th round grade on him. He's somebody out of all the guys that were available. Personally, Jaron Hall I had a 2nd round grade on, but they flagged his shoulder. And I think the Rams are really trying to stay away from those injury red flags. I think in another year, maybe even next year, and if they're in a better position, Jaron Hall's the pick. 2 years ago, Jaron Hall's the pick. This year, though, they felt like, you know what? No BS. We're going to go out and we're going to get our backup. We're going to get a guy that we know just in case he's ready to go right away. And he was probably the most NFL ready out of all the guys that were remaining at that point. I would say he's more NFL ready than Will Levis personally. So, and he went 2 rounds after Will Levis. But anyway, the point is, like you said, you're not drafting him to start. He's a 4th round talent. That's what I had. I think there are too many that looked at him as like this late round guy, like a 7th rounder. And what I was saying is like his tape's better than that. Like I didn't go in, like when I watched Christian Hackenberg and I heard all this buzz about him being, I was like, what are we watching? Oh, well, he had one really good. I'm not seeing that. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm watching Will Levis and I'm not really seeing what everyone else was seeing with Will Levis, but I get like the potential, whatever. And that's why he graded out higher. But I think with Bennett, what's fascinating to me is that this is somebody that he's not Jake Fromm. When Fromm was at Georgia and people constantly like, you picked Fromm over Jacob Eason and Justin Fields, they were right. Like Fromm wasn't that great. But Bennett had to win some games. That's the surprising thing. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's throwing to Bowers, and Bowers is going to be a top 5 pick next year, probably. He had Pickens last year, right? But this guy was winning games. Like, and that's one thing, we've seen guys get carried. I wouldn't say he got carried. Like, getting carried is like Jake Fromm, who was at Georgia. Getting carried is not like Bennett. I believe Jake Fromm was also drafted in the 4th, but no, it'll be interesting. And so my favorite thing about this, they're not hamstrung to him. They're not stuck with him. He's a 4th round pick. If they had drafted him in the 1st, it's a lot harder to get out of that than it is a 4th round pick. I mean, hell, let's look at Malik Willis, for instance. Titans didn't even want to develop the guy, and now they're like done with him. And he's a 3rd rounder. So they're not stuck to him. And if it's not working, for whatever reason, they can move on next year if a bigger and better prospect comes out or the year after. And that's the good thing. And if he ends up being a career backup, then so be it. I'm sure he'll take that and he'll be okay with that, because in the NFL, if you're a career backup, you're still making that money. You're still, I mean, look at Chase Daniel. I think you had a tweet a while back, like Chase Daniel had made this amount of money And, you had all these really good quarterbacks that hadn't gotten paid yet. And like Chase Daniel, his contract, like his lifetime earnings are like through the roof. And the guy started what? 5 games? I mean, that's the life right there. You're barely getting hit, and you're making all that money. So, yeah, I don't think Bennett's in any position to complain about that. But I do want to talk about a receiver that is maybe unfairly getting way too much spotlight. Puka Nacua. I get it. I like the pick. He's somebody, when I was watching Jaren Hall, I was like, who the hell is that? He comes down with everything. And he throws a back shoulder fade. This guy, for whatever reason, all these receivers in this class, they're all obsessed with getting 1 foot in bounds. Not Puka Nacua. Body control, sideline awareness, guy has all that. But I think with Puka Nacua, we have to remember Van Jefferson was a 2nd-round pick and had not even 300 yards his first year. Now, a lot of that was because Jared Goff couldn't hit the deep ball anymore, just randomly. But where are you on Puka Nacua? Because I hear all this. He's Robert Woods. He's, Josh Reynolds. I think he's more like Josh Reynolds than Robert Woods personally. But where are you at on him? And do you think people need to temper their expectations on, saying this guy is going to come in right away and win the wide receiver 3 job?
I mean, that would be quite the bad look for the Tutu Atwells and Ben Skowroneks now, wouldn't it? Definitely hope that doesn't happen, and not just because I want to or don't want Puka to not be good, but I think that would just spell a very, very bad look for some of the other remaining receivers on the roster, right? Because we know it's obviously going to be Cooper Kupp, Van Jefferson. Those are going to be your top 2 guys. There's no doubt about that. And then the discussion starts here at number 3. Do you want a vertical guy? I think obviously in that case, you're going to want a Tutu Atwell out on the field, someone who could take the top off the defense. And I genuinely hope they actually do everything they can to figure out what this guy brings to the table, because I mean, he's flashed enough to make me think that he's got some game. Maybe he's not a full-time receiver. Maybe he shouldn't have been a 2nd-round pick, but I think we all see that he's got something to offer in offense. So hopefully they can figure that out. And then in addition to that, you talk about wanting to have a blocker. I mean, Ben Skowronek, I hate seeing him out there. No offense to him, but he's a good blocker. Like, if you want to have a receiver who's a pseudo tight end or somebody who's going to put their hand in the dirt and do all the dirty work that everyone hates to see, but that turns 2-yard runs into 11-yard runs, he's going to be probably the first choice there. And he's obviously been a guy who's played a lot of football for the team. He's been in a Super Bowl. He's had some of these high leverage situations. So why would you want to have a Puka Nacua out there instead of him, right? So I think that's kind of where the discussion is when you talk about that kind of Robert Woods role. Personally, I haven't watched much of him. I'm intrigued to see what he brings to the table. I have seen a little bit, and then I've obviously read a decent amount on him. Based off of what I've read, I think he could maybe struggle a little bit against press coverage, and just releasing and getting off the line of scrimmage doesn't seem like the most explosive type of player. But at the same time, you see a lot of the big plays that he's had. He's really good with the ball in his hands. So I'm intrigued to see what he's going to bring to the table. Personally, I would like to let him develop and kind of stash him as a player, and we'll see in a year or 2 exactly what he brings to the table. But I mean, for me, that wide receiver 3 spot, I'm really, really hoping that Tutu can step up and bring something to the offense, because he's the one guy that I think can be a legitimate difference maker in the passing game amongst the options that we have.
Yeah, I think it's the tale of, ooh, look at that shiny thing in front of me. That's new. I like that. The idea of newer is better. I think you know where I'm going with this. I am not a Puka Nacua hater by any stretch. I like the guy's game, but I thought it was absolutely hilarious. So I don't know if you saw it on your For You page. I'm barely getting anything football anymore. So when I get it, it sticks out like a sore thumb. But my For You page the other day, I'm not kidding you, it was like 5 posts in a row from fantasy football guys, from NFL Twitter guys that I respect. Brett Coleman was in there. And it was like, Puka Nacua is Robert Woods. Like, it was like the same tweet, like 5 times over. I'm like, okay, what is happening? And then, like, my brother said that to me as soon as he was drafted. So that was the first time I heard it. And then all of a sudden, they're like, wait, Puka Nacua went to the Rams? Yep, they just got their Robert Woods. I'm like, what is happening, man? Like, what? So, look, I feel like it wasn't that long ago that Rams fans were hounding me to talk more about Lance McCutcheon and talk more about his, extensive role that is not going to be, I don't believe he's getting an extensive role. It seems like Tutu Atwell cannot get out of that shadow of the Creed Humphrey pick. And it's not fair to him. It's just not. He didn't pick himself there. He was drafted there. And the guy didn't really get an opportunity. And like you said, when he did, we saw some things. We saw some flashes. So how about let's pump the brakes a little bit. Personally, I want to see Atwell on the field more than Skoranek. I don't like hearing Skoranek number 3. I want to see Atwell. I think Atwell showed you the one opportunity he got with Stafford. He had that bomb of a touchdown catch. And then he showed you, what he could do with Baker Mayfield. I mean, he just needs to get more opportunities, I think. And I think Van Jefferson is in a make or break season where, look, if he has a good enough season, I think the Rams might consider bringing him back. But right now, I'm very bearish on the idea that he will be brought back. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. Not that I don't agree with bringing him back, but more so, I don't know if the Rams are going to do it. I will say this. He has better stats for the first 3 seasons. I don't know if you saw my tweet, but he has better stats the first 3 seasons than Jordy Nelson did. Jordy Nelson's 4th year, his contract year, he equaled what he did in those first 3 seasons. He absolutely blew up. I'm not saying Van's about to do that. It's probably somewhere in between him and Zay. Honestly, I kind of see Zay Jones in Van Jefferson. I feel like he's kind of a Zay Jones. Maybe he's a top 3 receiver, but maybe tapped out. You get him in a really good receiver room and he's wide receiver 4. And maybe that's his, but I don't know. Where are you on Van?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of know what he is at this point. And that, like you mentioned, I think he's a really, really good wide receiver 3. Rick's killing me in this chat.
He has no regard for human life, bro. Like, oh man. It's just
my apologies.
No, you're good. No, we have fun here. You can laugh. Yeah. It's okay.
Good Lord, I'm not used to it.
We're not in a studio.
I'm used to Locked On. I probably would have to edit this out on my own. So, I like Van Jefferson. I think he's one of the best wide receiver 3s in football. That would be a really good spot for him. In terms of wide receiver 2, I think he can play that role. To me, he's like an 800 to 1,000 yard guy. And I think he does everything well, nothing really amazing. I think his releases are pretty damn good, but there's not any area of his game where I'm like, all right, this is top 5 in the league. There's nothing else to it. But like he does everything pretty good, and he's a pretty good receiver. So you could do a lot worse than him. You could probably do a little bit better than him as well. Ideally, you would want him, I think, as a wide receiver 3, but I think you can get by with him being a wide receiver 2. The only thing is, can he stay healthy for the vast majority of the season? If he can, I don't see any problem with him going over 1,000 yards this year.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see if maybe he's different. Like he's not what we think he is. I think to his credit, to be fair to him, his rookie year, like I said, Goff stopped throwing the deep ball, so he was pretty much not used at all. His second year, he has 800 yards and good year. Obviously, he's injured. We find out he's injured halfway through the year, played through it. Probably explains why he was so lackluster in the Super Bowl. And then that injury carries on into next year, and he doesn't play for like half the season. By the time he gets in there, he doesn't really have Stafford thrown to him. So, you could argue this is his first year where he is one of the de facto targets for Matthew Stafford. And that's why I have hope about him. I have hope with him, and I have almost an intrigue that, if you look at, his yards per reception average is insane. It's among the best of any of these second round receivers since since like Deshaun Jackson. Like it's as high as any of them, except Deshaun Jackson was another level. It's like 20 yards per reception. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating there. It'll be fascinating, obviously, with Tutu Atwell. I think Cooper Kupp is going to be back to Cooper Kupp, right? So tight end room. They go out and they get Davis Allen. They traded an elite corner, and they got a third rounder and a guy who people are calling the equivalent of a third rounder, but let's be honest, 2021 third round pick. What is that worth now, Sos? I mean, let's be honest here. You drive the car off the lot, it depreciates, right? So Hunter Long is not a third rounder anymore. So it'll be interesting with him. He has one catch in his career. So I don't mean that as a knock on him. We don't know what he is. But they have Bryson Hopkins, who Sean McVay kept mentioning by name in the presser, and Tyler Higbee. Both are in their contract years. I love Davis Allen. I think he could play if he had to. Personally, I think they're going to redshirt him. Like, I think they're going to let Hunter Long play and just Sean McVay likes to take it slow with these guys like he does, right? So I think they're going to redshirt him. But where are you on Davis Allen? Because I think he could be an eventual starting tight end in the National Football League.
Yeah, I pretty much 100% agree. I think he's basically going to be redshirted. I'm intrigued by him. I genuinely am. I don't know that he's ever going to be a massive weapon in terms of in between the 20s. He's more of like a work up the seam, and if the ball comes, he's going to come down with it more often than not, versus I don't think you're going to split him out wide and use him as like a wide receiver type of tight end, which is what we're getting a lot of, like the Mark Andrews is and those type of guys. The one thing that I did see about Davis Allen that I think you could utilize this year, especially with no like number 3 receiver. You could probably use him a lot in the red zone, to be quite honest with you. I think that's a spot where he'd be very, very useful. Like you mentioned, though, I think very likely going to be redshirted for the most part this year. I don't expect to see him much. But in general, I think at worst, you're getting a guy who's going to be able to contribute a lot in the red zone, a guy you can definitely flex out, throw some fades and stuff too. And for that reason, I've seen someone comp him to a player, and it's like earlier, it's really stuck out to me. I think it was a really good comp. Harrison Bryant from the Cleveland Browns.
I see
really
that.
like that comp.
Yeah, I like that too. It's funny. I saw Hunter Long in the comments section. I was like, please tell me they didn't just compare him to Hunter Long. They have Hunter Long on the roster. It's like, the meme. Nah, we have Hunter Long at home. Hunter Long at home.
Spider-Man memes pointing at each other.
Yeah, that. No, it's, I actually, I really like him. And I think it's funny because when you really like a prospect and the team drafts him, and maybe your expectations are more even keel, like, because you've seen how this process goes, not to go too high on these rookies right out of the bat. I mean, I know, like, the one that we're going to talk about in a bit, I think he starts day one, but that's not the point. Point is, I think every time there's a new number, a new name in the building, like, people want to go crazy and like expectations go through the roof. And I mean, 3K talks about this all the time on Twitter. But I mean, it's true. So like I was getting, hate because Davis Allen was one of my guys. And then, someone's like, wait, so you just said Davis Allen. You ranted and raved about Davis Allen all off season. They draft him, and now you're telling me you don't even think he gets on the team? I'm like, I think he makes the team, but like, this is the nature of the beast. I mean, tight end is one of the hardest positions to play in the National Football League, maybe the hardest, because you have to learn how to be a wide receiver and an offensive lineman. You don't just do that at the NFL level like that. It's not like a drop of a hat, So, I mean, like, let's be real here, right? So, yeah, I agree with you. And the comments make me laugh, man. There's some funny ones. Yeah, Jacob Harris is gone. I made a mistake because Jacob Harris and Lance McCutcheon look kind of similar. So I was doing a reaction video behind the grind, and I kept saying, "Oh, it's Jacob Harris." No, he's not on the roster. It's Lance McCutcheon. Okay, yeah. For the last time, I messed up. All right, we move on. Cornerback here. I think you knew where I was going when I said could start day one. Trey Hodges-Tomlinson. Okay, he wins the Jim Thorpe Award, best cornerback in college football. I don't put too much stock into that, but I do think it matters to a degree. Okay, he's undersized, air quotes needed, because let's be honest here. All right, we've seen Nickel Roby-Coleman at 5'7" start on a Rams defense. Okay, this guy's what, 5'7", 5'8". I'm not worried about this guy's size. What I'm worried about, the only thing I'm worried about with Trey Hodges-Tomlinson, two things. One, bigger receivers are going to absolutely ragdoll him. That's his big issue. So if you're going up against DK Metcalf, well, don't go up against DK Metcalf because that's not happening. That's the first thing. The second thing, the 5'3" corner. Oh my God, he's just comedy man over here. Oh, of course, he's got jokes. He is comedy. So the second thing, so I'm sure you would agree, because if you watch the tape, this guy is grabby as hell. Okay. He's going to get himself into some trouble, because if you develop that early on, like if you develop a reputation, you're locked in, man. You're grandfathered in, not in a good way. Referees are going to be at you. They're going to be at your throat. Number 6, better watch it.
I mean, we're 1 for 1 right now. We're in an identical spot. I 100% agree. I mean, once you start to get grabby, they're going to start to throw that flag, even when you aren't grabby, right? And that's not a reputation that you obviously want to have in a league, so that is concerning. It was all over his tape. Definitely, I think for me, the biggest drawback, more so than the size. I love it because half of me thinks, he's feisty. He's someone who said he's got that dog in him. He's legit got that dog in him. And he's going to fight. And he's going to fight for the ball. And he's going to be aggressive and physical. And I love that. But at some point, man, they're going to start throwing those flags. And they're probably going to come quite often. And he had a lot of flags in college, too. So I think that's just something, unfortunately, that you're probably going to have to live with. And that's just what it is. To be fair, I would rather take that than a guy who's not going to even be within 3 yards of the opposing receiver he's supposed to cover. And I genuinely think this guy's a pretty good player. In terms of the size, probably will slide him into the nickel, right? He's going to, I think, have to basically live in the slot. And, I mean, you could make the case right now that he's the second best corner on the roster, I would think, probably behind Kobe Durant. And, I think with how the setup is right now, you're probably going to have Jacoby Durant playing outside and maybe Trey Tomlinson on the inside at nickel, and then that third spot is maybe a bit of a question mark. That's how I would view it. And then that third spot, it could be Rochelle versus Darion Kendrick in training camp and see who's kind of the best there. But oh my God, I think that cornerback room is absolutely horrendous right now, and I don't know how it gets better. They traded Jalen Ramsey obviously, and I think that it was time. I think it was pretty clear that was going to happen, but good Lord, it's not good.
Yeah, and I'll move back to that in a sec. I got some stuff apparently. I have a source throwing over to me. First off, the Rams are going to start their season against the Seahawks. Then it looks like they're taking on the Niners in the second game, and they got the Eagles in the 5th and the Steelers in the 6th. So decent, just some right before the whole thing happens, just some leaks that I just got. But yeah, no, looking at the corners, I'm really, really curious. Like, so what was the deal with Robert Rochelle? Because this guy went from playing his rookie year to then they're like, hands off. They didn't even want to use him. He's a special team guy. And now, he's going to have to start. I mean, by virtue of the fact they didn't really address the cornerback position at all. I mean, aside from getting a guy that is 5'8" and is really limited to just the slot corner spot. I mean, it's yeah, I'm with you. I'm feeling I'm trying to okay, they're going to play zone. It's not like they're going to play bump and run with these guys, and they're not going to get trashed all game, but still, I mean, is that gonna be good? Because I mean, Darion Kendrick, I know the Rams, some Rams fans really think highly of him. Personally, for me, I saw some ups and downs there, more downs than ups, if that makes sense. So I don't know. Jacoby Durant is the only one that I feel confident in. And then next up is Trey Hodges-Tomlinson. And then honestly, I feel better about Rochelle, but I'm just confused as to why, what the deal is here. Do they like him? Do they not like him? I guess they do, because they made 14 picks and only one of them was a cornerback that's not even going to compete at his position. So where are you on all that?
Yeah, oh man, it's a tough spot to be in, because I totally agree. I think Jacoby Durant's the one guy that I feel comfortable with, and the one that, you have to start and you have to hope takes the next step, and it's basically the guy moving forward, because there's nobody else that can be that guy, I don't think, on the roster. Then like you, I think Trey Tomlinson is the next one up, and he's probably going to be confined to being in the slot. So probably not going to play a ton of snaps, I don't think, even if he is considered a starter or a guy that plays, 65% at most. Someone said shout out Clan Ram. Shout out Clan Ram. That's where it all started back here. So one other thing. You seem to go with Rochelle. I think I might lean Kendrick. I don't like either of them. I don't feel good or comfortable with either of them either. I think with Rochelle, you're looking at a guy that's obviously got a lot more size. And if the Rams want to have a little bit more size, you probably have to go with him, because if you have Durant out there and Tomlinson, you're talking about two tiny cornerbacks. So obviously you need someone with a little bit more size to go guard the DK Metcalfs. And Rochelle, freaky athlete, I just don't think he can cover. I genuinely think he's going to struggle a lot. Like you mentioned, they will play probably a ton of zone, more so than any team in the NFL, I would assume, this year. And that'll help cover some of the issues that they have being sticky in man coverage. But, I think Rochelle's, there's just something lacking there where I just don't think he can cover all that well. Versus Kendrick, I think he's flashed a little bit enough for me to, and I think he's not good at all. I think he's flashed enough to where, like, I think he can make some plays. He might get a few picks here or there. He might get absolutely toasted here or there. But, I mean, it's not good. It's just not good either way.
Yeah, it's so I don't know if you got a chance to watch the kid from Jackson State that was coached by Deion Sanders, Isaiah Bolden. When the Patriots got him in the 7th round, I'm like, how? Like, I mean, there are guys like that I was seeing come off the board. The Steelers got a guy in the 7th round that I was looking at, Corey Trice, who they met with. I'm like curious as to what their plan is at corner. They didn't really bring in anybody. And and everybody, watching, I had reached out and I wanted to ask, like, hey, is Troy Hill, potentially in the cards here? No. Okay. I was told that more likely it would be John Johnson than it would be Troy Hill. Now, I'm not saying John Johnson's coming back. That's not what I'm saying. But I was told that directly. It would be more likely for John Johnson than it would be Troy Hill. And at that point, I was kind of like bummed, because I'm not saying Troy Hill's the greatest thing ever, but I would like to have some more veteran presence in that room. I think at the very least in that safety room, at least you look at Jordan Fuller. He may not be the veteran you think of, but he is a veteran. I mean, to a degree. So, he's a guy who can be a leader in that room. Ernest Jones has taken up the mantle as the leader in the linebacker room. You got Donald. I want to have him in all the phases, all the position rooms. And I feel like the Rams are really lacking at corner. And this might be a position that they're being methodical with and be like, you know what? We saw how easy it was to go out and trade for some of these corners. We saw what these guys have been traded for. Maybe they're just going to sit on this. And if they need one at the deadline, they'll get one. We don't know. But I don't know. So I feel really weird about the cornerback spot. I feel decent about the safety spot. I'm not saying it's jaw dropping, but if Fuller stays healthy, that's a pretty good starter right there. Then I like the combination of Russ Yeast and Quentin Lake. I think they both have potential for late round guys. And I actually really like Jason Taylor II, who I think could emerge down the road. I'm not saying he's going to start this year, but I think he's going to be a hell of a lot of fun on special teams. That guy plays with just 110%, just nonstop motor, aggression, all that. So where are you on the safety room?
I agree. Exactly. Cornerback, don't feel good. Safety, I kind of like. I think low-key it's one of the better positions on the roster. I think Jordan Fuller is so underappreciated, and I think it makes sense maybe coming off of last year, right? He was dinged up, and then he missed like the vast majority of the season, and probably took a little bit of a step back, like pretty much everyone else on the roster outside of Cooper Kupp did. And but I think Jordan Fuller's, I don't want to say he's going to take a step into stardom per se, but I think he's on that John Johnson track where, he's starting to become a more popular name, and he's getting closer and closer to just being a very, very all-around great player. He's a guy I'm expecting to take a big step in his development this year, so I think obviously one spot is locked down. And then like you mentioned, I think Quentin Lake and Russ Yeast flashed enough last year to make me think that one of them could start, but I also like Jason Taylor too, like you said. So I wouldn't be shocked if Taylor ultimately starts. I think maybe he won't, just because Fuller probably has a little bit more of the capability to play similar to a Taylor, where like he has the range, and maybe they're going to want someone to complement him a little bit more. And I think maybe like a Russ Yeast or maybe even a Quentin Lake might be better at that, where they're maybe more aggressive going forward and being more of a help and run support versus another guy with just a lot of range on the back end. But I wouldn't be shocked if they ultimately go with another guy that maybe has a little bit more range too, considering how vulnerable they might be at cornerback this year. So, I'm intrigued to see how it's going to shake out. I think that second safety spot is wide open. And I mean, in general, the Rams have probably proven to most of us that they can develop safeties, they can draft safeties. They've done it a lot over the course of this regime. So if there's one spot that I definitely feel comfortable with, that they can find someone that, again, like these guys are all late round picks, who can develop into a legitimate starter, I definitely think it's the spot.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think we forgot to talk about Nick Hampton and O'Shawn Mathis. We're wrapping it up here because I know you're busy, and I'm going to give out, because I know people are already asking, can you do a live stream about the reaction for the schedule or whatever? And yeah, I'll do another live stream after this one, but I want to obviously finish this one before I even look at that. So Nick Hampton, O'Shawn Mathis. One, you have Nick Hampton playing at App State, a lot of juice off the edge. Not a great run defender, but he's solid. Like, I think day one, he is a rotational guy, which that's a role in the NFL. And then O'Shawn Mathis is a lottery ticket. He's a guy who had really good tape at TCU. Thank God I actually somehow decided to watch that, because if I just watched 3 games at Nebraska, I would not have thought that. So really good tape at TCU, goes to Nebraska. Nebraska is a complete, let's say, just for lack of a better term, shit show. He flashes on TCU tape, didn't really flash at Nebraska. He's a lottery ticket, right? You get him for 2 years, 3 years maybe, and then you see what ends up happening. I don't think he's going to make the roster. I don't, because I don't think he's ready to play. I think this is somebody that probably is a special team, draft and stash special team, or not special team, or practice squad guy. But where are you on those two?
Yeah, so I haven't actually watched Mathis personally. Like you mentioned, it is a numbers game at this position, and the Rams got a lot of bodies, in particular, a lot of young guys that they're kind of tossing in the fold here. And I think that's sort of the point, right? It's they're going to throw a lot of darts right now and hope to God that one or two guys at least stand out enough that they're earning starting spots going into next year, and then some of the other guys that you can tell the difference in who's going to be able to be a rotational guy, like you mentioned, like a Nick Hampton, who, I mean, he's tiny for an edge rusher. He's not going to be able to play early downs, I don't think, versus the run. So guys like that, and then in addition, guys that can actually contribute and play special teams too. And so, you can only keep so many of these guys. And one guy that I do like from last year too is Daniel Hardy. I wouldn't be shocked if he does have a legitimate role this year too. So, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. I think for Hampton, you mentioned it pretty well. I think going to be a decent rotational guy. I'm excited to see how that shakes out. Like I mentioned, he's very, very light, so I don't know that he can ever develop into anything more than a guy that just gives you a handful of snaps here and there in passing downs. But a guy that, again, very athletic. I think that those are the things that I'm looking at my edge rushers. How explosive are they coming off the ball? How they can bend, like you mentioned earlier, how they can corner. These are the kind of things that I'm looking at. So I'm intrigued to see what he shakes out. And I will say there were some people that I looked at that are very highly regarded in terms of the scouting world that had Nick Hampton rated as a better player than Byron Young. So, we're talking about a guy that I think is maybe a little bit slept on when it comes to this draft class. And like I mentioned, I did not watch Mathis, so I don't have much on him. But like you mentioned, it is just a bit of a numbers game there. So wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't ultimately make the roster.
No, I definitely hear you there. A big fan, Nick Hampton. I had him, I think, as my 15th edge. I think I had Byron Young as my 12th, 11th in there. I mean, I'd have to look at it. Obviously, can't remember all that stuff off the top of your head. Final thoughts. Anything on your mind that you want to throw out there? I'm not going to torture you and have you go through the specialists, because no offense to specialists, but like, what are you going to give it? Like a P for punter, a K for kicker? Like, is that your grade? Like, I mean, I don't watch kickers and punters. Like I did as much as I was going to do. I think they got a good punter based on what I watched, but I mean, it's not even the same as some of the other positions. But any final thoughts for you?
Yeah, I'm going to say I also like Zach Evans. Excited to see what he's going to bring to the table.
We forgot about him, but yeah, I very much like him.
Yeah, solid player. I mean, he has some of those plays on tape that make you really think he could be a big playmaker in the NFL, as long as he can, keep his head on straight and ultimately find himself a role in this offense. And I think the Rams are very very clear with wanting to have a rotation of guys back there. man, I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table, because this is a guy that genuinely can turn some of those smaller plays into big ones. And the Rams, I think, really need that when it comes to their running game.
I agree with you. And, he's somebody that's funny. I've seen comps with him being compared to Cam Akers. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I think he's actually kind of similar to Dalvin Cook. That's what I saw. And I had a second round grade on him. So I thought it was a great pick for the Rams. We'll see. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with him. I think there's a chance he gets elevated to running back 2. And then, Kyron Williams gets demoted, but in reality, he's just turned into a third down guy, which is fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I think that's going to do it. Everyone, be sure to go follow at QB's MVP. Go give my guy Sosa some love. I know most of you already know who he is. And be sure to hit the thumbs up if you're on YouTube. The like button really does help me out. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have Sos back on during the season at some point, as long as you want to talk more Rams football. You're always welcome. But yeah, it's been fun, man. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy, and hopefully we're looking at a good team this year. I think they're going to be decent. I don't think they're going to be anything special. I don't think they're winning a Super Bowl. I think we can kind of temper those expectations, but it should be an interesting year. It's definitely going to be a lot of coverage is going to be necessary when it comes to this team.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm always down to come back. Hopefully we can do it again, and hopefully the Rams can surprise a few people, myself included.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you on YouTube, by the way? Someone just asked.
Not like posting content. No, I'm a consumer.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to go subscribe to the consumer, it's just Sosa Kremenjas.
I don't even know what my YouTube is, to be honest with you.
All right.
Just watch stuff, yeah.
Well, it is what it is. But hey, guys, appreciate you. I'm going to be back live just because you guys asked. So I guess I'll do it. Just reacting to the schedule. But until next time, you guys take care. And I'll see you guys, if not in the next video, I'll see you guys soon. Later, folks.